Hi, welcome back to a brand new video on the channel. Today we're going to see a proof of concept. So I was playing around with Microsoft Forms and I was trying to see what information is giving the tool back to us and how we can get that information like a little bit more dynamically in Microsoft Power Automate. And one of the information that I was trying to figure out how to retrieve is the average time to complete. I mean, this is very easy to see here in the responses section of each of your form, but to make this a little bit more fun, I try to achieve this with Power Automate. And it's not that easy as it sounds because, yeah, you need to get all the responses and then you need to calculate somehow the time it took the user to submit each of these responses, then add that all up and then divide it by the number of responses that you get back. And to achieve this, we're going to use one of my previous solutions where we receive all the responses from one specific form at once and then do that all logic in Power Automate. As I said, this is a proof of concept and maybe a key section that you can take away and maybe you can use it in future use cases is how to achieve the following task, adding the values from in an apply to each loop from the previous run, in the second one, in the third one, and so on. So you have like 9 runs and you want to add one value that you have in the first run to the second one, to the third one, so that you end up with a sum, with a sum value from all those values in your apply to each run in the Power Automate. So stick around, I think this will be pretty helpful. And if you like the video, give it a thumbs up and make sure to subscribe to the channel for more such videos. Have fun. Okay, so now we are back in Power Automate. And as I said, this is a proof of concept. So maybe it's completely unnecessary to do this complicated stuff for just retrieving this number. But again, just take the logic and maybe you will need it somewhere else. Okay, so I'm not going to build this again. It's already built, so I'm going to walk you through. I made this a manual trigger flow because, yeah, it's easier to trigger for this use case, but you can do it dynamic based on some other logic, or maybe scheduled, like once in a week or once in a month, whatever suits you best. So this is not mandatory, so you can do something else. Okay, what you need to do, of course, is you need to send an HTTP request to SharePoint. And to do so, we place here, this is a free connector, by the way, so you don't have to use any premium connectors for this. And what you need to place here in the site address is the forms.office.com. Here, when you try to write something, it will use that, it will show you that drop down. So you need to go into that manual. Let me show you what I mean. So if I remove this, it offers you like a list of sites that you can choose from. So you cannot just write here, it will replace it. What you need to do is to click here, enter custom value, and then you can write your custom form or custom site address. Make sure that this is a GET request because we are getting the information. And then the most important part is this URI. I'm not going to do this now. I'm going to link the video where I'm going through this in a very detailed manner in the video description. And maybe it's going to pop up here somewhere at the top. And you can click on it and watch that video as well. But stick around here first, or maybe go watch that video and come back, as you wish, because this is the part that you need to get all those responses. Okay, so after you have the responses retrieved, then we are going to initialize 2 variables. So we need one variable where we are going to save the total seconds, and one other variable where we are going to save the duration times, which means total seconds is going to be like a placeholder and it's going to deliver us at the end the total. That's the one that we are adding up through each run of that apply to each loop. And the duration times is where we calculate the difference from form enter data started and ended. So how much time the user needed to complete that form. So these are 2 important variables that we need to create. As I said, here's the variation times. This is a float type because seconds are going to come in a float type number, like 20.03 or so on. We will see in a second in the run. And the value is empty. So we are just initializing these variables here. Same also with this var total seconds. This is float. And here I'm writing the value 0 because I want this variable to have the value 0 at the beginning, and then we are adding all those values before that. I think if you leave this empty and then you do an addition, I think that will throw an error because it's trying to add like blank or so. I'm not sure, I haven't tested, so just to be sure, write 0 there. So this is our placeholder. Okay, so then the magic happens in our scope session. So I created this scope here to keep it a little bit tidy. Here are some actions inside. And we know that when we use this send an HTTP request to SharePoint, we retrieve the data in a JSON format, but we cannot reach out to that data. So if I click here real quick and go to dynamic, we have only the body. So we cannot choose there from the items that are in the body, right? So for that reason, we copy the response from this body, and then we use it here in this JSON. And I'm going to show you in the run where you can find this body, this JSON schema. So after placing it here, we see here then that we have these columns that we can then use in our later actions. And we have to like ID from the run, not from the flow, from the form run. We have the start date and the submit date. And then we have like other information like responder name. This will be filled out if it's for internals only, and then the answers and so on. But we don't need that for this proof of concept. What we need is the start date and the submit date. And since we passed it into this JSON, then now we can use it here as a dynamic value. As you can see here, from our past JSON, we have now all these columns that we can use, and we need the start date and the submit date. And the way I'm using it in this compose action here after the past JSON is that so one important thing is because at the end, after we have the sum of all the seconds that took to complete all the runs or all the submitted forms, we need to divide this by the number of submitted forms so that we get this average time to complete, right? Otherwise we have just like the whole total time for whole responses. And the number we divided by is this number here, so the number of responses. And that we receive by counting or by calculating the length of the outputs from that JSON, this past JSON extract data from requests, from HTTP requests. So this is the past JSON action here that you can see. And from that, we get from the body the values, and then we calculate its length. So this is important. I will paste these codes or these lines here from the expressions in the video description as well. So you don't need to pause to write this down so that you have it also without any mistakes. Okay, so now we have calculated the number of items, so the number of how many forms have been submitted. And then we go into our for each loop, which what we do here is we have the compose action to calculate the time for each response. So here we do a date difference from the items that are in this for each loop. Before we do that, let's see what's in the for each loop. So we need to pass like the values, right? So that it knows where it needs to loop through. And the values are coming from this. So let's paste it here, and we can see here that, ignore this one, the outputs from our past JSON extract data from HTTP requests, the body and the value. So this is exactly the same that we saw in here. Grab this one here and paste it over there. Let's remove these curly brackets because these are only showing because I copied from the view here. So you can see this is exactly the same expression. So we are using the length function to calculate the numbers that are in there, and we're using the same outputs here to pass it to our for each loop. So now we have passed the values like the items, and then we go and create a new compose action where we do this dative. So this dative, I'm going to paste it here. So this dative is just calculating the difference from the start date and the submit date. Now we saw those options in here, which are the start date and the submit date. So for the first run, is the first submitted form, it's going to calculate that difference. Then what you need to do is, this is the most complicated expression that you're going to need, is to convert that response that you get here into seconds, because what you receive here, you will see in a second, is a timestamp. So for that reason, we need to convert that into seconds so that we can add it in our calculation later on. No? So we need to then do that addition. And then timestamps, you cannot add it that easy because it's seen as a string. So the easiest way I found to do it is to convert this into seconds. Yeah. So this is a bit complicated, so I'm going to copy this and paste it here as well. That's a bit more complicated. You can use it as this. Just make sure that you place here your outputs. I'm going to paste this also in the video description. Okay, so after this has happened, you will see in a second in the run, it's just showing the time step here in seconds. So what we do next is we use this set the variable. So we use then the variable duration times, and we set here the variable with a value. Let's go down there, where we add the variable's var total seconds, which is 0. Now we initialize that variable 0 with the outputs of this conversion that we did before, this complicated one. So let's say we get from the first form submitted like 11 seconds to complete it. We add this here into our variable to the 0, which is var total seconds. And then we get a value, which is in this case example for 11 seconds, right? So we have this 11 seconds here, which will be written like this, I think. And then we initialize the second variable, which is our var total seconds. And here we are just writing the variable set duration, the variable var duration times, which we set here. So in the second variable, it's written the 11 in the total times. So var total seconds ends up having this value in a float value. So in the second run, then the var total seconds has 11. So that 11 is in here. And the second run, we have calculated the time in seconds. And let's say this one is then 12 and this one is 11. So we'll have here 23. And then we write the 23 here. In the third run, so on and so forth. Like, it doesn't matter how many runs you have. So this will add up. And at the end, after the runs have finished, because there's a limited amount of numbers that we are retrieving, we will get out of this loop. And then we compose here this double divide function, where at the beginning, in the first divide, I am dividing the var total seconds, which was the added up number, by 60, so that I can get the minutes. And then I divide it by the number of submitted forms, which is from the output would compose, calculate the number of items in the HTTP response. And then we end up with a number which would be similar to this one here. So let's test it out. Let's click save and then test. So let's use this last test there. Okay, it ran successfully, so let's take a look. We have here our sent HTTP request to SharePoint. And what we can see here is that in the response or in the outputs, we have here our data context, and then we have here the values. So this is the body, the values. Let's see if I can show these raw outputs here. Let me place myself on somewhere else. And we can see here on the right hand side now that we have the body, the body here and the values. And here are the submitted forms. So we have the first form, start date was this one here, 8/31/32, and submitted date was 8/31/55. So this is and here also the seconds. So this is the time that we are calculating, right? And so on and so forth. So for the second submission, and we have here 9 submitted forms. And the code that, or the schema that you need to calculate the parse JSON, or to give it to the parse JSON, is this part here, right? So the values. Okay, so here we are just initialize these variables, and in the scope we have here the parse JSON. So in the row outputs, we have here a similar visible data like the one we had from the response. Just the big difference here is that we can now reach out to this data and interact with it. As you saw, we can then select it as a dynamic value. And then we, as I said, we use start date and submit date. And here we calculate the number of items in the HTTP response. You saw that we have the 9 items. And let me go back right hand side. And we can see here that the response or the outputs from this calculation is 9. It calculated the numbers of the HTTP requests to SharePoint correctly. Okay, so now is the fun part where we go into our loop. So we have in the first run. Now we calculate here the difference between the start and end date, or the start time and the end time. And we get here these 22 seconds. And the 22 seconds are correct because if you remember, let's see here in the response of the first item, we have the submission, the start date 32 and the submit date 55. So this is 23, plus minus with these seconds of the back. And we have here the response, which is 22.816. As I said, 23 plus minus the seconds. And as you can see here, this response is a string response. So we cannot use this in an addition or subtraction. We need to convert this into seconds so that we get this float number here, 22.816. And that's what I'm doing here with that second compose inside of our loop. And what we retrieve, it says here no outputs, but if you click show raw outputs, you can see here that it's a 22.816. So this works. This was the complicated expression. And in the first variable, I'm saving the response from this compose, the outputs from this compose, into the first variable, which is our var duration times. And we are adding that to the var total seconds. So we're doing that addition. And so we end up with a 22.816 because the total seconds was 0. And what we do is we replace the value from the var total seconds variable with the outcome of the addition we did in the action before. So the value here is not 0 anymore, but it's 22.816. Yes. So in the second run, we calculate the second time, 20.961. We have here that in float, 20.961. And then we add this to the value from the total var total seconds. And the one before was 22 point something. This one was 20.961. So we end up with a 43.777. And then we add that value or replace the value in the var total seconds with that one. And so on and so forth. So we have here 9 runs because we had 9 responses. And the last value that we have here is 4,813.078 seconds. 4,813 seconds. And now here we need to divide that by 60 and then divide it by 9. And we end up here with 8.913 something minutes, which is very close to this one here, 8.54. I don't know, I mean, it's a bit more. I don't know if mine is more correct or the one here calculated from Microsoft. Yeah, but it doesn't matter. I mean, it's so, yeah, it's like seconds difference. And this is how you calculate that number that you have here. So I hope this proof of concept was helpful because I think you learned a couple of new stuff. So first of all, how to calculate how many items are coming in a HTTP request, right? We use this also in SharePoint, in forms, you can use it in many places. So by using that length function, it's always the same, it's very reliable, and then you get the correct number. And the most important takeaway, which is hopefully this logic here, how you can add values from one run of for each loop to the other one, and so on and so forth, so that you end up like with a sum. Because I think this is a bit tricky. yeah, so by learning this new logic, we also figured out how to calculate this number. So I think it was a helpful learning by doing, of course. So if you like this video, I hope you can give it a thumbs up and that you subscribe to the channel so that I can make more videos like this. Have fun and see you in the next one. Bye.